My name is Katie Heffinger, and my persuasive speech is called Protecting the Elderly. The issue of elderly citizens operating motor vehicles without additional regulation from the state or federal government has become a major point of concentration in legislatives across the country. High-profile major automobile accidents in which seniors are involved have cast a spotlight on this segment of the population, fostering debate over whether the elderly should be tested more frequently and monitored more closely by licensing agencies. States should have laws on the books that target the driving abilities of the elderly. Elderly drivers should be reevaluated to determine if he or she can operate a motor vehicle safely. The nationwide debate over elderly driving is rooted in two major areas. The first, statistics that to some link an increased number of automobile accidents to senior citizens who are impaired by failing vision, reflexes, and other handicaps. The second is a trigger event, a high-profile incident that serves to onlookers as evidence for the need of government intervention. Very few states have to date enacted restrictions on elderly driving and driver licensing, while most states have strong rules and regulations governing young drivers. One of the greatest challenges surrounding the issue of elderly drivers is creating rules or restrictions that speak directly to the causes of these accidents. A common sentiment among proponents of restrictions is that elderly residents are more likely to have eyesight problems, slower reflexes, and/or poor hearing, making the elderly more vulnerable to mistakes while operating a motor vehicle. This opinion comes from trigger events such as those mentioned earlier rather than actual discernible trends. There is evidence supporting both sides of the issue. On one hand, supporters of restriction for senior drivers point to data such as Department of Transportation studies. The data indicates that people aged 65 or older represented 13% of the U.S. population, but 17% of the country's motor vehicle deaths. Such studies suggest that drivers involved were hampered by poor reflexes, poor vision, and other factors. Adding to this argument is the fact that most states do not have license renewal requirements for testing vision or driving competence. The majority of them simply require renewal every 10 years. The American Academy of Neurology claims that 76% of individuals driving with mild forms of dementia are able to pass a driver's test. Coupled with trigger events, such data provides a compelling case to have increased regulations of elderly drivers. Two high-profile cases in Massachusetts, for example, led to a drive for such changes to Massachusetts driving laws. An 88-year-old woman struck and killed a 4-year-old girl while she was in a crosswalk. A 79-year-old man hit and killed a well-known police officer. After those incidents, the Massachusetts House of Representatives passed a bill that would require residents 75 and older to visit the DMV in person, as well as pass a vision test in order to renew their license every 5 years rather than the standard 10. In 2006, older people made up 14.1% of all traffic fatalities, 13.5% of vehicle occupant fatalities, and 18.9% of pedestrian fatalities. Research also shows that at the age of 65, drivers face an increased risk of being involved in a vehicle crash. On the other side of the issue are those who cite the trigger events that often view such legislative efforts as isolated incidents. While they might agree that the individuals who committed such accidents should not have been behind the wheel of an automobile, opponents of increased regulations argue that the number and severity of such incidents are reducing. Regardless if the numbers of accidents are reducing, just like teenagers, the elderly should be tested to see if he or she is capable of operating an automobile safely. Opponents of increased restrictions also cite recent statistics that suggest that elderly drivers are not as dangerous as some argue. An Australian study conducted in 2008 by the insurance group AAMI reported that only 8.5% of drivers aged 65 and older are involved in an accident in the years of 2007 and 2008, the lowest rate among any age group. The research is inadequate. How can one-year statistics constitute several years of proof that the elderly play a significant role in automobile accidents? The ability to drive a motor vehicle is a convenience that can make our lives easier. However, motor vehicles can also be extremely dangerous when operated improperly. To ensure everyone's safety, state governments place restrictions on who can be licensed to drive. To initially obtain a license, one must demonstrate the ability to safely operate a motor vehicle. To keep the license, one must continue to drive in a safe manner. In fact, one can lose his or her license by failing to obey the rules of the road. If an elderly person cannot operate a motor vehicle safely, regardless if it's due to health reasons or not, he or she should not be allowed to continue to obtain a license for the safety of everyone on the road. The Federal Highway Administration states, studies of motor vehicle accident data conducted by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety show that elderly drivers, generally defined as drivers over the age of 70, have a significant higher crash rate than younger drivers, and are second in crash rates only to the youngest and most inexperienced teenage drivers. It therefore makes sense to regulate both of these age groups in order to ensure the safety of everyone on the road. The steady increase in the number of older drivers has led to greater concern about safety on the road. One commonly cited statistic is that older drivers are involved in more crashes per mile driven than younger drivers. This may be because older drivers spend more time driving short distances locally rather than long distances on highways and thus fewer miles driven daily. However, this does not justify ignoring a significant problem, especially as the population of older drivers continues to increase. Older drivers also tend to be involved in different types of crashes than younger drivers. They are less likely to be involved in rear-ending or driving off-the-road accidents, and more likely to be involved in failure to yield accidents. Studies suggest that it is because the driver either misjudged the time and distance between vehicles and improperly determines whether it is safe to proceed, or in this case of drivers over 80 did not see the vehicle at all. These studies suggest that older drivers may lack the coordination, reaction, and visual skills that younger drivers have and are necessary to operate an automobile safely. Ultimately, vehicle crash data shows that drivers under 20 and over 70 cause a disproportionate number of accidents. Since drivers under 20 are so heavily regulated, it is fair and reasonable to regulate drivers over 70 as well. Young drivers are regulated so heavily for the safety of themselves and others on the road, so older drivers should be regulated heavily as well. Perhaps even more so than younger drivers, age does not provide effective cutoff for determining which drivers have the physical and reactionary capacity to safely operate a motor vehicle. Individuals age at different rates, have different family histories, medical conditions, medications, etc., which may or may not affect his or her ability to drive. Individuals over a certain age are deemed as a protected class by the law, and thus it would be illegal to pass a law requiring, for example, that all individuals must give up their license upon reaching the age of 70. The most realistic way to institute this policy would be to require re-examination at set intervals. Indeed, dangerous driving is not limited to teenagers and the elderly. Forced retesting would be the best way to find individuals who no longer meet the requirements for safe driving and remove them from the road. Driving is a privilege and not a right. The safety of everyone on the road should be the government's first priority. Health issues like poor reflexes and impaired vision is a hazard to all drivers. Elderly drivers should be monitored more heavily, just like younger drivers, and strictly regulated.